today I'm going, as I said earlier, I'm going to give you guys, we're going to go through the training in its entirety, but for time management purposes, we're going to bypass the breakout sessions and just try to make it interactive. And then if there are any looming questions, if you can save them to the end till we get to the question and answer portion, that would be great. The other thing is I ask you guys to be patient with me because this is my first time actually doing the training by myself without Dr. Sorrell. So if we hit any bumps, it's just because the training is, we usually kind of tag team. So, but I'm flying solo today. So please be patient and bear with me. I first want to give you guys a look at what the objectives are for the training. Recognizing substance use disorder as a chronic brain disease. We're going to discuss some of the traditional and current thoughts associated with the disorder and some of the methodology that we use to treat it. We're also going to talk about some different approaches using evidence-based and effective treatment options. We want to try to identify some of the goals that we're going to, some of the key points of the training. The training provides an overview of abstinence and harm reduction approaches. It talks about the principles and goals of harm reduction. We talk about some of the science and biological basis for it. And then again, we talk about the treatment. Then we talk about some of the stigma and myths associated with the MOUDs. And then we talk about the effectiveness of MOUDs. The way that we like to start the training, though, is to just ask a couple of questions to start the discussion, and so that we can go on this journey together. Our first question is, what are some of you guys' personal beliefs as it pertains to substance use disorder? I know that's a pretty broad question, but does anybody care to share what their beliefs are in regards to substance use?
Oh, we will. We're eating right now. Sorry, that's why our screen's off. So I firmly believe that I have an allergy to all substances. If I were to put like a drop of alcohol or any type of substance in my body, I would immediately go into what's known as the phenomenon of craving. And that means that it's automatic. Like that's all I think about. And it physically changes my brain chemistry. Courtney, what you got?
Other than, prior to becoming a woman in long-term recovery, my thought process was, oh, I can quit anytime I want to, and it wasn't until I was, my lived experiences wasn't enough for me to understand that it was bigger than that. Now I know that it is a disease, a spiritual malady, as well as that chemical imbalance, that happens in the brain. Yeah.
Okay. And thank you guys for that. The second question is, what do you already know about harm reduction? Anybody?
So what I know about harm reduction is not a whole lot, but I do know it's about safer use or managed use or abstinence and kind of meeting people where they're at. Excellent.
That's it. That's a great and fantastic definition. And thank you for that, Ms. Proud. The third question is a very broad question, and it asks, how is harm reduction approach different from the 7 challenges? Is anybody familiar with the 7 challenges?
I don't think I am.
Okay. The 7 challenges is a sort of a holistic approach. It was created in 1991 by a Dr. Charles Schweibel on the East Coast in Rhode Island. He was a doctor who was he ran an intensive inpatient and outpatient facility for substance abuse. It's a holistic approach, and it actually was geared toward young people. And actually, right now, I'll give you guys a quick snapshot of what the 7 challenges are and what their principles are. I'll read them. Number 1 is challenging yourself to honestly look at your life, including your use of alcohol and other drugs. Number 2, challenging yourself to look at what you like about alcohol and other drugs and why you use them. Number 3, challenge yourself to look at harm that has happened and could happen from your use of alcohol and drugs. Number 4 is challenge yourself to look at your responsibility and the responsibilities of others for your problems. 5, challenging yourself to look at where you are headed, where you would like to go, and what you would like to accomplish. Number 6 is challenging yourself to make thoughtful decisions about your life, including your use of alcohol and other drugs. And 7, challenging yourself to take action and succeed with your decisions about your life and your use of alcohol and other drugs. One of the reasons why I think this question is part of the training is because there's several different approaches to being able to provide treatment. Ms. Prowell, you talked about one as it's kind of encompassed in harm reduction, and that's abstinence. The question asks, what was the difference between the 7 challenges and what's the different approaches between the 7 challenges and harm reduction? And there's 2 distinct ones. Number 1, harm reduction is more, it's more actionable. When we look at harm reduction and what that does, the 7 challenges are more introspective. If you look at it, they're asking you to challenge yourself. They're asking you to maybe ask yourself a lot of introspective questions before you take action. Whereas when we look at harm reduction, we'll see the harm reduction has you've already moved from that particular you've moved from premeditation, if you will. I'm sorry, was there a question? All right. So if anything, if we look at this, we understand that there's no cookie cutter approach to providing treatment, and that the one thing that we can all agree on, whether we're on the abstinence or harm reduction side of the argument, is that a lack of treatment most assuredly it equals to death. So we have to look at all the alternatives and try to find the one that's best suited as we attempt to provide individualized care for everyone that's going to come into our purview as particular clients or patients. So right now we can look at the difference between abstinence and harm reduction. Here's our overview. And because I want it to be interactive, can somebody read what the five principles and philosophies of abstinence is?
Okay. Number 1, related to the 12-step program by the Alcoholic Anonymous. Number 2, participation in individual or group therapy as a part of treatment. Number 3, readiness comes at rock bottom. Number 4, abstinence program may include social, spiritual, and physical wellness components. And 5, often criticized for being faith-based.
Okay. Can somebody please read harm reduction?
Sure, I can. Create strategies to reduce adverse health, social, and economic consequences resulting from drug-related harm, keeping clients alive and developing readiness, avoid the harm caused by misuse of drugs, treat drug users with dignity, maximize the intervention options, and criticize for being secular and enabling.
Okay. Can anybody talk a little bit about what they see in regards to differences between the 2 approaches?
I'm sorry, go ahead, Jim.
I was just gonna say, I've worked in the field for about 35 years, starting out primarily with the abstinence-based model. And it is very somewhat black and white. Once an addict, always an addict. The only way to sustain the recovery is complete abstinence. You either buy in 100% or you're going to relapse and face more trouble. Harm reduction, I remember when that philosophy first came out, it was really frowned on. It was, again, the enabling component to it that, we don't necessarily want to encourage them to use, but I think in all, it focuses on improved quality of life for the individual. And we may not get them from A to Z, but maybe we can get them from A to M, where their life problems continue to resolve and improve, and it's a continuing process.
Thank you, Jim. And there is still that kind of I want to say adversarial relationship between abstinence and harm reduction, and people who are proponents of the 12-step program and people who are proponents of harm reduction. So the training will actually look at a lot of these positions from not only contextually from how we look at them today, but it's going to give us some historical context as well, and give us some background as to how they develop. One of the and here are the 12 steps right here. We don't have to read them, but we can just look at we can look at them and see that the narrative has a faith-based tone to it, and it's pretty cut and dry. But the one thing that that one of my mentors, when we talk about this and we debate at length about it all the time, is that the 12-step program, for all its intents and purposes, it served a purpose when in its inception. It was actually the first program that actually brought people together and provided them some level of structure to be able to address substance abuse. It's almost 100 years in existence. It was Alcoholics Anonymous was created in 1935, and here we are at 2022. So that would make them what, 88 maybe, 88 years in existence. So and of course we would like to see the field evolve from 1935 to now, and harm reduction is that, and the integration of using MOUDs, all of the medical assisted recovery teams and medicated assisted treatment. All those things are all offshoots and the evolution of where the 12-step program started, how it evolved into harm reduction, and where we are right now. But again, the language in the 12-step program is very, very rigid and speaks to how strict the program was in regards to its implementation at the beginning. But before we go any further, let's have a working definition for harm reduction. And here that is. Harm reduction refers to policies, programs, and practices that aim to minimize negative health, social, and legal impacts associated with drug use, drug policies, and drug laws. It is grounded in justice and human rights, and it focuses on positive change and on working with people without judgment, coercion, or discrimination. It consists of health and social services, drug consumption rooms, needle and syringe programs, non-abstinence-based housing, and employment initiatives, drug checking, overdose prevention and reversal, psychosocial support, and information on safer drug use. So the definition that you gave, Ms. Searle, was so good in regards that it was very concise, and it actually captured exactly what this is. Now, this is almost a paragraph long, but we understand that just from the tone of it, it promotes tolerance, it promotes safety, and it most of all, it meets the person where they are. And those are the principles that we want to make sure that we keep in mind as we go throughout this training. Okay, so there's actually four foundational components to harm reduction. And here they are. Number one, the avoidance of stigma. you know, at heart, I mean, well, I oversee community outreach programs for the ROSC Leadership Center. At heart, I'm a community outreach person. I'm a guy that whose background has been with engaging directly with the community and engaging directly with clients, whether it be in substance use or violence prevention or the other things that I've experienced in my career. But the one thing that I've seen that's probably the largest and biggest hurdle in regards to being able to get information out is the avoidance of stigma. There's so much stigma in and around substance use disorder and treatment. In doing community outreach, I don't know what some of you guys' experiences have been, but right now we're in the midst of a huge Narcan distribution campaign where we're going out giving away Narcan for free, trying to provide information and how to use it. And the neighborhoods have such pushback in regards to us being able to disseminate this life-saving overdose reversal medication. And part of it is because they think that it draws that element. It draws a substance abuse, a substance use element to their neighborhoods. In which cases, most of the task force that we work with have already designated those places as being hotspots. And what we're trying to do is provide a remedy. So if you guys could talk a little bit about what your experience has been with stigma, I'd like to hear if I'm not alone in having run up against stigma and what it looks like from you guys' purview.
Well, being on the treatment side of things, when clients come to us, they seem almost surprised or unexpected when they're treated with respect, when they're treated decently, because that's not the way society has generally treated someone who has a disease, you know, the disease of addiction. You know, they just don't look at it as a, you know, community in general, society in general doesn't look at addiction as a disease. They look at it as a moral issue or a weak will issue, and it's a weakness, and that stigma gets put on them as they are just humans. And often when we work with them on our end, and they just seem genuinely surprised to be treated with respect.
And all of those aspects go to the second and third principles of harm reduction: respecting the rights of people who use drugs. In our society right now, substance use disorder and people who are actually have been inflicted with this disease, they're almost dehumanized in regards to the way that we are approaching them in our communities and how we're looking after them. The meeting people where they are thing, it has been almost turned into a cliche, but it's so poignant and it's so appropriate, because the way that the service has to be provided is that we understand that it's a disease. We wouldn't treat it any differently if someone has diabetes or if someone has some other chronic disease that we would treat. One of the things that I talk to people about when I'm engaging them in the community, especially as it pertains to Narcan, is that we're trying to normalize it. We want you to have Narcan with you on your person the same way you would have a rescue inhaler if you have asthma, same way you would have an EpiPen on you if you had an allergic reaction to something. So in that, we talk about how we want to normalize this particular treatment, just because right now we're in the midst of a pandemic within a pandemic. Over 100,000 people overdosed last year. That's too many people when we have the means to be able to cut that number down substantially. The third part of it is a commitment to social justice and collaboration with networks of people who use drugs. We have to be able to treat people equally. They have to be treated and have the same rights as people who don't use drugs, so that they can get better. So that we can come up with ways and think outside the box and be in a safe space to come up with ideas that will be able to have people who are reluctant become more engaged in treatment, and then in turn turn around and be able to give give that same level of empathy back to their communities. And lastly, a commitment to evidence. The thing that, in my opinion, sets harm reduction apart from the 7 challenges or abstinence is the fact that harm reduction actually uses science and evidence-based practice to back up the claims that they make. Statistically, you can show how residential and medication and the combination of those things in the harm reduction principles actually have a positive impact as opposed to somebody who is not in a program like this. And statistically and data and being data informed allows us to be able to see how to better treat those people and to also find out where we can pinpoint where services are most needed instead of just having I was just talking to one of our partners yesterday, and he encountered one of his medical vans, and he was looking through the supplies, and he found 2 boxes of outdated Narcan, and it hurt me because we give out Narcan to our communities, and we run out every single time we run out. But not having the resources allocated so that we know where to put them and where they can be of most use and where they won't go bad or spoil or whatever. That's to me that's it's shameful because we have the data, the technology, and the wherewithal to be able to get that to the people who need them the most. So also, I'd like to look at the goals of harm reduction. Somebody read that?
Keep people alive and encourage positive change in their lives. Offer alternatives to approaches that seek to prevent or end drug use. Reduce the harms of drug laws and policy.
Okay. So we've kind of talked about how we want to, how we agree that harm reduction is a priority, and one of its paramount goals is to keep people alive and encourage them to make some positive changes. We also like the flexibility and diversity of harm reduction, just because it offers alternative approaches. It doesn't offer a cookie cutter approach. It meets the person where they are, and it actually is actively trying to prevent them to end their drug use. But we haven't really talked about the harms of the laws and policies. One of the things that we'll touch on in later on in the training is the fact that historically how these things kind of came into fruition. How at one point drugs were and substance use was very, very accessible. You could go to a drugstore or a pharmacy, or in some cases in the early 1900s, pre-20th century, they had covered wagons with people walking around with tonics and painkillers and things of that nature. But one of the things that stuck out to me about that particular caption when it talks about drugs was that the language of using harm reduction and things like that has become extremely politicized just as of late. Maybe a couple of weeks ago, I saw that President Biden had made a commitment to committing more funds toward harm reduction and drug overdose facilities. And once that happened, a lot of the feedback and rhetoric that we were hearing was that providers like ourselves, treatment providers like ourselves, were going to be giving away crack pipes. And when I heard that, I was just like, I was extremely disappointed, just because it oversimplifies it. First of all, it again stigmatizes the practice. It's false. And then the other part of it is just that, excuse me. The other part of it is just that we're looking at a situation where people who are on the fence about it have that misconception reinforced. But at any rate, I digress. I do want to give you guys some historical context in regards to how substance use had in its beginnings and how it was in the early United States, how accessible it was. Before 1910, you could purchase toothache drops with cocaine in it. Cough syrup. They had a tonic for nerve pain with French wine coca. You see, cough syrup has alcohol in it, chloroform, cannabis, and an abstract of morphine. And all this was you were able to purchase it over the counter. At the time, Coca-Cola was actually the drink of the very eccentric and rich people, and it was called an intellectual beverage, and it actually had actual cocaine in it. So we look at how prevalent and accessible illicit substances were in the early 20th century, how accessible it was, and how it was used as painkillers and nullifiers and things of that nature. And to some degree, they still are today. But from a historical context, let's look at how and when it changed. This timeline shows from 1910 to 1920, and it looks at the factors that impacted how substance use changed and how it was actually criminalized and demonized, and how it was in its accessibility to the common public. The 1914 Harrison Narcotics Tax Act looked to regulated manufacture and distribution of prescription opioids. The licensing of pharmacists and physicians were another part of it. So whereas before you could buy them straight from a drugstore, or from a convenience store, if you will, the corner store, now it had to be distributed by a licensed pharmacist or a physician. And dispensing it was by prescription only. There were no over-the-counter narcotics. In 1919, the Supreme Court criminalized prescribing and dispensing of opioids for individuals with opioid use disorders. So if you had a disorder, if you had the disease, at this point, it was criminalized for you to be able to receive any kind of treatment. From 1919 to 1935, we look at 25,000 physicians were indicted for the Harrison Act violations, and all morphine maintenance clinics were closed. Now, the last two bullets are, they reference two propaganda-based movies. If I don't know if you guys are familiar with Birth of a Nation and Reefer Madness. Birth of a Nation is one of the first motion pictures that came to screen and into cinema based on white supremacy and how Blacks were depicted, and also in the film, it shows them abusing and showing all this different kind of maladaptive behavior with the use of alcohol and drugs. So this film went a long way toward depicting people of color as not being able to, as people who consume substances, and it somehow changed their behavior to be maladaptive, criminal. In some cases, it implied that they became rapists and murderers and etc. Reefer Madness actually did the same thing, but it actually demonized and criminalized the Hispanic culture as it associates them with marijuana and the use of it and the illegal distribution of it. So those two films are stand out in history as huge propaganda films that went a long way toward creating a lot of the stigma and stereotypes that are associated with the drug culture today as we know it. In 1935, going forward, there was medical treatment for substance use disorder from pre-1910, but race and immigration affected how we label substances and their use. So basically what happened was that it was criminalized for people of color to be able to use or be able to get help from the receiving medication or any kind of medication management with substance abuse. Medical treatment all but disappeared for people of color. However, white treatment remained. If you had access, wealth, or some semblance of money, you were able to still receive treatment. Okay, we're gonna skip this breakout session. Are there any questions so far? No? Okay. Then we'll move on to abstinence. This particular slide talks about why abstinence alone doesn't work. Substance use disorder is a disease that requires treatment. We talked about that earlier, that there are different alternatives to treatment and there's a lot of different options out there, but what we all can agree on is that no treatment at all it results in death for people who have a substance use disorder and it goes untreated. Abstinence has been around since 1935. We talked about that as well, but it doesn't work for every patient. Harm reduction offers a more practical and realistic approach just because of all the things that we've mentioned previously in regards to the variety of treatments that are available and the level of tolerance that comes along with providing harm reduction services. The third bullet talks about up to 91% of people who use the abstinence strategy will restart use. 91%. A person's tolerance diminishes after a period of abstinence, making a return to use extremely dangerous. Now, I have there's a small clip, and I don't know if we'll be able to see it all just because of the time constraints, but it actually talks about how the body how it builds tolerance to especially opioids, and then once you go through withdrawal and then start back using, how that is so dangerous and how that can ultimately cost you your life. We see a lot of that when we work with patients and clients who have come out of being incarcerated. There's a large number and I don't have the statistics in front of me, but a large number of our patients that have come out of being incarcerated and just getting out of jail. If we're not able to put them into services right away, we see a large amount of overdose when they first come home. And that in and of itself has prompted us to try to start doing a lot of medical assistant recovery and starting programs in institutions and things of that matter. But I mean, that's something that we could talk about later. Right now, let's look at how opioids and illicit drugs affects the metabolism of the brain and the heart. Here are some pictures that depict the effect of drugs on our brain and the metabolism of the brain. and the metabolism of the heart. On the left, you see a healthy brain. If you look at the bar in the middle between the brain and the heart, it shows you the colors that dictate high to low functioning. So as the colors as the colors go from red to darker colors like green, blue, and black, we see that denotes a lower functioning or a lower level of metabolism in the brain and the heart, and those are because those people are users of drugs. This particular slide is a bit outdated as it pertains to some of the language, but it's still a very, very accurate depiction of the effect that substance use has on these particular two organs, especially when we look at the amount of distortion and low functioning in the brain of a cocaine abuser, a cocaine user, and then we look at the heart function, which is when we look at that in comparison to a healthy heart, it looks like it's almost not functioning at all. The next thing I like to talk about a little bit in regards to this is if we could try to look at how the craving for the drug, how it looks, and how we can maybe put that into context as it pertains to how we crave food or how we crave different things that we like to eat or we like to have, but how it looks from the perspective of someone who has an addiction. Okay. Here's what they're calling a craving meter. So if we were to look at our normal cravings for food in context to I guess we would look at it and it would be the size of a baseball. That's how we crave food. We have that the size of a baseball, so it could fit into our hand. Craving for water. Well, water makes up a large portion of our body. We need it to live. Our cravings for that and thirst is the size of a basketball. Put both hands around it. Now, someone who has substance use disorder, their cravings for that particular drug is the size of a baseball field. So when we look at that in context, in comparison to someone who has been engulfed by this disease, and we look at how it is for us to feel like we're hungry for food or even thirsty. When we put that in context like that, we can see how overwhelming the disease can be on a person, and have and the effect that it can have in regards to them being able to seek that out, and in the event that they can't get it, what extent they may be driven to. The next slide talks about, and it begins to talk about the opioid epidemic. This is a short slide. So I mean, this is actually a video. So it'll take a minute to look at it.
Patient and outpatient programs.
Sorry.
More than 3,000 years ago, a flower began to appear in remedies in ancient Egyptian medical texts. Across the Mediterranean, the ancient Minoans likely found ways to use the same plant for its high. Both ancient civilizations were onto something. Opium, an extract of the poppy in question, can both induce pleasure and reduce pain. Though opium has remained in use ever since, it wasn't until the 19th century that one of its chemical compounds, morphine, was identified and isolated for medical use. Morphine, codeine, and other substances made directly from the poppy are called opiates. In the 20th century, drug companies created a slew of synthetic substances similar to these opiates, including heroin, hydrocodone, oxycodone, and fentanyl. Whether synthetic or derived from opium, these compounds are collectively known as opioids. Synthetic or natural, legal or illicit, opioid drugs are very effective painkillers, but they are also highly addictive. In the 1980s and 90s, pharmaceutical companies began to market opioid painkillers aggressively, actively downplaying their addictive potential to both the medical community and the public. The number of opioid painkillers prescriptions skyrocketed, and so did cases of opioid addiction, beginning a crisis that continues today. To understand why opioids are so addictive, it helps to trace how these drugs affect the human body, from the first dose through repeated use to what happens when long-term use stops. Each of these drugs has slightly different chemistry, but all act on the body's opioid system by binding to opioid receptors in the brain. The body's endorphins temper pain signals by binding to these receptors, and opioid drugs bind much more strongly for longer. So opioid drugs can manage much more severe pain than endorphins can. Opioid receptors also influence everything from mood to normal bodily functions. With these functions too, opioids' binding strength and durability mean their effects are more pronounced and widespread than those of the body's natural signaling molecules. When a drug binds to opioid receptors, it triggers the release of dopamine, which is linked to feelings of pleasure and may be responsible for the sense of euphoria that characterizes an opioid high. At the same time, opioids suppress the release of noradrenaline, which influences wakefulness, breathing, digestion, and blood pressure. A therapeutic dose decreases noradrenaline enough to cause side effects like constipation. At higher doses, opioids can decrease heart and breathing rates to dangerous levels, causing loss of consciousness and even death. Over time, the body starts to develop a tolerance for opioids. It may decrease its number of opioid receptors, or the receptors may become less responsive. To experience the same release of dopamine and resulting mood effects as before, people have to take larger and larger doses. A cycle that leads to physical dependence and addiction. As people take more opioids to compensate for tolerance, noradrenaline levels become lower and lower, to a point that could impact basic bodily functions. The body compensates by increasing its number of noradrenaline receptors so it can detect much smaller amounts of noradrenaline. This increased sensitivity to noradrenaline allows the body to continue functioning normally. In fact, it becomes dependent on opioids to maintain the new balance. When someone who is physically dependent on opioids stops taking them abruptly, that balance is disrupted. Noradrenaline levels can increase within a day of ceasing opioid use, but the body takes much longer to get rid of all the extra noradrenaline receptors it made. That means there's a period of time when the body is too sensitive to noradrenaline. This oversensitivity causes withdrawal symptoms, including muscle aches, stomach pains, fever, and vomiting. Though temporary, opioid withdrawal can be incredibly debilitating. In serious cases, someone in withdrawal can be violently ill for days or even weeks. People who are addicted to opioids aren't necessarily using the drugs to get high anymore, but rather to avoid being sick. Many risk losing wages or even jobs while in withdrawal, or may not have anyone to take care of them during withdrawal. If someone goes back to using opioids later, they can be at particularly high risk for overdose, because what would have been a standard dose while their tolerance was high can now be lethal. Since 1980, accidental deaths from opioid overdose have grown exponentially in the United States, and opioid addictions have also exploded around the world. While opioid painkiller prescriptions are becoming more closely regulated, cases of overdose and addiction are still increasing, especially among younger people. Many of the early cases of addiction were middle-aged people who became addicted to painkillers they had been prescribed, or received from friends and family members with prescriptions. Today, young people are often introduced to prescription opioid drugs in those ways, but move on to heroin or illicit synthetic opioids that are cheaper and easier to come by. Beyond tighter regulation of opioid painkillers, what can we do to reverse the growing rates of addiction and overdose? A drug called naloxone is currently our best defense against overdose. Naloxone binds to opioid receptors, but doesn't activate them. It blocks other opioids from binding to the receptors and even knocks them off the receptors to reverse an overdose. Opioid addiction is rarely a standalone illness. Frequently, people with opioid dependence are also struggling with a mental health condition. There are both inpatient and outpatient programs that combine medication, health services, and psychotherapy. But many of these programs are very expensive, and the more affordable options can have long waiting lists. They also often require complete detoxification from opioids before beginning treatment. Both the withdrawal period and the common months-long stay in a facility can be impossible for people who risk losing jobs and housing in that time frame. Opioid maintenance programs aim to address some of these obstacles and eliminate opioid abuse using a combination of medication and behavior therapy. These programs avoid withdrawal symptoms with drugs that bind to opioid receptors, but don't have the psychoactive effects of painkillers, heroin, and other commonly abused opioids. Methadone and buprenorphine are the primary opioid maintenance drugs available today, but doctors need a special waiver to prescribe them, even though no specific training or certification is required to prescribe opioid painkillers. Buprenorphine can be so scarce that there's even a growing black market for it. There's still a long way to go with combating opioid addiction, but there are great resources for making sense of the treatment options. If you or someone you know is struggling with opioid use in the United States, the Department of Health and Human Services operates a helpline, 800-662-4357, and a database of more than 14,000 substance abuse facilities in the US, www.hhs.gov/opioids.
Sorry. Okay, this is our second breakout session. We won't break out, but can I'd like to get some feedback on what you guys thought of the video. Did you guys find it informative? Did it introduce you to anything that you didn't know, or did it provide you with any new information?
Elizabeth has her hand raised.
You all
Oh,
enjoy yourself.
Yeah, so
What's weather?
hold on one second, sorry.
No, it's 48 here.
I put my earphones.
Oh, no, it's okay. So my question was related way earlier to the statistics on abstinence where it said 91%. Do we have the statistics for the harm reduction as well?
Oh, excuse me.
Not in this particular training, but you know what, Elizabeth, let me do something for you. I'll make sure I can get that information for you.
Okay, thank you so much.
I'll let me see. I'll get the information for you. Okay. About the you want the harm reduction statistics, but did anybody, again, just trying to get some feedback on the actual video, and the reason being is I'd like to know if it's useful and whether or not it should remain part of the training, or if it provides any kind of information, any additional information about what we know about opioids already. If it doesn't, then we can, as we're going through and working on making the trainings more effective, we ask just so we can know whether or not it provides anything, and then whether we should keep it.
Well, so my thing, oh, was somebody speaking?
I was just going to say, I found it very informative. Being in the field for a long time, it was routine for me. But I know if people are in this training that don't have a history of working with addiction, I thought it was very basic, very, very easy to understand, very informative.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's all I was gonna say is like, so I have been in recovery for like 3 years now. And before that I've been in and out. So I personally, like, I knew all the information that it was giving us, but if somebody that hasn't been in recovery or doesn't work with people in recovery, I would keep it, especially because I love TED Ed. I love those videos.
Okay.
Yeah, I have to leave for another meeting. Apologize, I have to cut out.
Okay, and we apologize because we got started late. So we can make sure that you get a copy of the recording, Jim, and
I appreciate it.
anything else, and I'll make sure that I can put I'll put my contact information in the chat, or you may already have my email. If you have any additional questions, please feel free to reach out to me. And thanks. And again, sorry about the mishap at the beginning.
Oh, no problem. Apologize,
Okay.
I have to leave. I enjoy it.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you, guys.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And if I may, Kenneth,
Yeah, sure.
I found it to be very informative as well. I'm trying to use my phone, but this is tough. Am I?
You just have an echo.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
So I guess, I mean, I don't know what everybody's experience level is in regards to harm reduction and treatment and things like that. But is everybody familiar with the terminology that's on this slide right here?
Yes.
That's okay. All right. Well, one of the things that I think it stands out about this is like when we talked about earlier, we were talking about, and the slide alluded to it, that once you come through withdrawals, and then we go, it goes back to when sometimes people relapse and have issues. Elizabeth, is your hand raised?
No, I just forgot to take it down. I'm sorry.
We look at trying to implement medication assisted recovery within our institutions and systems and in our community. What's really good about that is that it's peer initiated. So a lot of times we're talking about people who have had experience or who are in recovery and actually can speak the language of the person who is actually going through the addiction. A lot of professionals and paraprofessionals, they may have, their hearts are in the right place, and they are very effective in regards to providing services. But with the MARs, I find, and I have two fantastic ones that work with me. They do great work. They are very, very good at allowing us to make inroads and how to effectively communicate and work with people who are in the community who are suffering from SUDs. And it's a very, 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 very great and useful program. So I just want to make sure that we highlighted that. One of the other things that the video highlighted was naloxone or Narcan, and I just wanted to find out if everybody was familiar with the use of how to use it.
I've been in the trainings before.
Okay.
I've never actually to administer, but I've been in the trainings.
Oh, okay. So I'm sorry, you said you never actually, Miss Powell, you say you have to.
I've never administered it, but I've been in the trainings.
Okay, yeah. I have been. I actually had to administer some to a client on an outreach out at an outreach event as I was demonstrating. We have like a 2-minute presentation on Narcan where we talk about the signs of overdose, and then we show how to use the actual nasal Narcan, which I have right here. And during my demonstration, we were doing a demonstration at a shelter, and one of the gentlemen actually was displaying an overdose with symptoms of an overdose. And we saw the actual demonstration of it, and we saw the use of it. Actually, what it did for me was it just kind of put it in real life, put it in a real life situation, because when I see, I'm more alert to the symptoms and some of the what to check for kind of things when it comes to this now. So it's made me that much more alert. It's made us be, to be more I guess in tune with some of our clients and patients in the community. And it's just one of those things where we see that this epidemic is touching everybody, and it's just so close. It's not something that you just see on the news anymore. The next slide actually goes a long way towards talking about the myths that are associated with medication for opioid use disorder. One of them, and some of these have been talked about already, but the first myth is that MOUD replaces one addiction with another. The actual facts are that many studies have shown that MOUD helps keep patients healthier, reduces criminal activity, and helps prevent drug-related diseases like HIV and AIDS and hepatitis C. The second one is that MOUD patients are weak and not serious about quitting unless they hit rock bottom. The facts about that is that addiction is a disease and it should not be seen as a failing, such as diabetic patients don't hit rock bottom for therapy, for treatment, I'm sorry. MOUD is not effective because it does not immediately end drug dependence. Addiction is a chronic, long-lasting disease and is not cured by MOUD. OUD is well managed by MOUD. Likewise, diabetes is not cured by insulin. And I think that's a great, great comparison in regards to that. The last myth is that Narcan and buprenorphine just prolongs the inevitable. They'll overdose and die eventually. MOUD can make the recovery process much safer and has saved many lives by preventing death from overdose or dangerous behaviors associated with street or black market or unregulated drug use. This particular chart talks about the clinical outcomes of clients or staff who actually use MOUDs versus treatment without medication. So it shows that increased retention in treatment if you're using buprenorphine or methadone or have using naltrexone, that there's a likelihood that you'll remain in treatment and that you'll benefit from it. It has reduced the overall overdose death, reduced all-cause mortality, which I'll show in a graph right after this, and it also reduces HIV risk behaviors. Sorry. And as I just mentioned, here's this particular graph that shows the comparison between people who who have all-cause mentality, which means it could be any level of sickness, and compared to opioid-related death. The three categories are if a person is using just medication only, or if they've been in residential only, or if there's a combination of the two. As you can see, there's a distinct increase of whenever somebody uses are receiving both medication and has been able to take part in residential services. Both graphs show that people who are fortunate enough to be involved in both services have the most success in being able to deal with having MOUD. I'm sorry, I'm sorry, OUD. These are two particular 4 trials. It talks about the graph above, the graph next to this shows that data from 4 separate clinical trials comparing the effectiveness of MAT-based treatments, which is medical assisted treatment, with methadone, buprenorphine, and naloxone, to those that did not incorporate medication. So there's the graph of the people who used it and the people who didn't. The people who had MAT are in green, and the people who were given a placebo are in gray. And it basically shows that the people who had medical assisted treatment benefited almost 3 to 4 times more by having been taken part and received treatment. What does the best treatment program look like? This is I guess this is the full spectrum of services that harm reduction looks upon as being the basically kind of like wraparound services for a particular client that encompasses all levels and deals with all the different life domains as it pertains to vocational services, mental health, medical, educational, HIV and AIDS services, legal services, and family services. So it covers the full spectrum of life domains and issues that a particular client may encounter when they've sought treatment for substance use disorder, and having all of these things in place provides in full service, if you will, but it provides the person the best chance to be successful and stay in recovery. Here's a summary of medical assisted treatment and the effectiveness of it. It reduces the risk of overdose. It increases treatment retention. It increases patients' ability to gain and maintain employment. It increases the likelihood for complete recovery. It improves social functioning. And it also improves birth outcomes for women with a substance use disorder. You guys have any questions at this point? I apologize, I kind of ran over my time. I know you all have other things to do. I'm gonna start sharing my screen. Make sure I put my information in the chat.
And you'll send me the recording?
Absolutely. I'm sorry, 1 second. Let me make sure I get you guys my information. I apologize if I seemed a little rushed at the end. I was trying to make sure I looked at time and everything like that. I appreciate everybody's patience with me today because, again, this was my first time kind of doing this solo, but I've made sure that I put my information in the chat. If you guys come up with any additional questions, please feel free to reach out to me. And thank you guys for your participation this afternoon.
Thank you so much, Kenneth. This is
Yeah,
great.
thank you so much. That was
You
very
guys are
informative.
very welcome. Thank you.
No problem. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.